Serious, solicitors, lawyers, what's the worst case of you should have mentioned this sooner you've experienced? A person involved in a motorcycle accident who sustained legitimate but not serious injuries. CCTV showed the incident. They were very much not at fault. They decided this was their big payday. Claimed they could barely walk. Had PTSD. Serious back trouble. Would never work again. The whole 9 yards. They neglected to tell their lawyer they had been, working a manual labor job, riding motorcycles again, did a bungee jump. All of which we caught on video they documented via social media. They did not get the multi-million-pound settlement payment they expected and were pursued for fraud. It was a fun phone call after we sent the tape full of evidence. Co-suspect was defended by another lawyer, who argued in his closing arguments that there should have been a police lineup during the investigation, since the suspects were brought into the station when the victim was still there. Client turns to me and says that they had been a lineup and they were not identified. This lineup was about 30 minutes after the alleged robbery. Nothing in the file suggests a negative police lineup. We do trials based on written statements by police. They are hardly ever in court to testify. I mention what my client said in my closing arguments. The prosecutor's mouth drops and she becomes pale. Hearing is suspended for further investigations. Couple of weeks later, police officers are testifying in shame that they forgot to finish the report on the police lineup. Prosecutor's case is thrown out for irreparable harm to the trial. Learned while my client was on the stand that she had a little bit of a drug problem. She disclosed immediately after that she was going to fail the drug test the judge ordered because she had been a daily meth user for years. She was stunningly gorgeous, had held the same job for over 25 years, and was a rockstar mom to a kid with special needs. Unlike 90% of my clients, she was always on time, responsive, and did everything I asked. To date, the only high-functioning meth user I've met. But FCK, that hearing would have gone quite differently had she mentioned that to me beforehand. For your information, most of the time we can deal with bad facts. At the very least we can give you the advice you need to hear. But there isn't much I can do with surprise facts in the middle of a trial. I was representing a man that was accused of sexually assaulting the young daughter of his girlfriend, who was married to another man. The key issue was whether or not my client's DNA profile should have been at the scene. Only skin cell tissue had been recovered, not seminal bodily fluid DNA. And it was not an exact match, but rather a match to a profile that included him. A few weeks before trial he finally told me that the woman's other son was likely his. They had been having an affair for more than 5 years. The fact that the boy shared his DNA was a pivotal reason that the DNA profile would have been present. Edit. Grammar. A big issue was a language barrier as my client did not speak English and we used an interpreter for all of our communications. Had a guy with a DUI. Asked about any criminal history. He said no. So I started the paperwork for him. It's a first-time offense program that seals the record and drops the charges once completed. Get to the courthouse. Talk to the DA. Find out the guy had another DUI a year prior. Also was on probation from the first one still. His excuse for not telling me was the first DUI was made up and he wasn't intoxicated. But pled guilty anyway. Unfortunately I ended up representing him for both bases. Did not get paid nearly enough for the shit I went through. But I did manage to keep him out of jail so he could take care of his elderly mother. Made him give up his vehicles though. My client was badly hurt in a car accident and promised me he was never hurt in one before. He was actually hurt in 44 prior accidents, all of which he filed claims for. Which is how I found out when the mediator showed me the defense's ISO report. The fucking look on my client's face, LMAO. I guarantee if he had 44 prior accidents, he knew damn well what an ISO was. ISO is a record of your prior insured accidents. There may be some tiny insurance companies that don't report claims to ISO, but checking ISO is routine for virtually everyone. I had a client on a family matter We were in court and I was going on about how being a father was the most important thing in the world to him, and his ex pipes up and says, well, he never sees his other children. Apostrophe. I'm sorry. Other children? That being said, many clients leave out embarrassing things until they get called out on them. Please tell your lawyers all the facts. We've literally heard everything and really don't care. Just let me prepare to explain that your weekend habits of cocaine and sex dungeons doesn't affect your ability to parent. Spent several hours zealously arguing that my client was severely disabled and couldn't work due to a back injury. It was so bad that the poor dude couldn't even sit in a chair throughout the entire proceedings. Rest my case. Opposing counsel calls in a DEC representative who proceeds to produce record after record of my client's deer hunting activities. He sat in a tree, in freezing weather, for many hours, shot and killed multiple deer, and transported their carcasses out of the woods all on his own. SMH. My favorite. The plaintiff on the other side, so no attorney-client privilege issues here, was in court telling the judge that each of my clients, on separate occasions, raped and impregnated her without her consent. This was already highly improbable because one of my clients was biologically female and couldn't have impregnated her. Then, in court, in front of the judge, this plaintiff abruptly mentions that she's never met my clients. Easiest win I ever got. As a solicitor, one of the most annoying things I've had happen was, after an hour-long consultation with an older couple about changing the husband's will, the wife hands me a letter from his doctor which says the husband has dementia and does not have capacity to sign medical documents. Like, you didn't think that was a good place to start? Upon reading this, I felt like the wife might have wanted to let him say his piece as to not embarrass him, and then inform you as to the points afterwards for the same reason. My grandfather had dementia and it's often easier and healthier for them if they get to say their piece without feeling indignant. Completely understand wanting to know earlier to negate the loss of an hour. But for someone who's lived an entire life and is declining, personally I wouldn't chalk it down as too much of a loss. Special ed case. School district was supposed to be providing services to the child in the home. Clients told us the school district had never sent anyone to provide the services. They hadn't heard from anyone in the district about scheduling, etc. Brought us up during a pre-hearing conference with judge and opposing counsel. After the conference, opposing counsel sends me pages of affidavits and documentation of all the times the school district employees went to the house and were refused entry by my clients for various reasons, or clients just didn't answer the door when they were clearly home. Clients had no explanation about why they lied to me. They fired us shortly after and I was not sad. Was prosecuting a simple assault and battery. Story I get before trial is baby daddy shows up and punches new boyfriend before leaving with the kid, who TBF he has custody of because mom tested positive for coke at birth. At the time girlfriend baby mama tells police yup, that's what happened. But, in the meantime she and new boyfriend broke up and now she is back with baby daddy. So her story has changed and she is saying it didn't happen. She isn't credible. So I discount her new version of events and still put the case in front of a jury because the victim is adamant and there was an injury to his face. Defense obviously puts the girl on the stand, where it first comes out that she and the victim went Netflix and chilling as reported to police, but were actually doing cocaine and ignoring the baby. The baby daddy apparently knew she did coke at this location, so when he saw her car there he went and pounded on the door demanding their kid. She then says that the victim hit himself in the face to make it look like he was beat up. As she is saying this, the victim starts hitting himself in the head and yelling no, 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 like the special needs kid the school makes wear a helmet, before storming out. The jury went with not guilty. And I understood. Okay. Here we go. Defending a lady in a simple neighbor dispute. Neighbors said she assaulted them with a hose and threatened their kids. Case was pretty weak. BC my client was an old lady and she adamantly denied everything. Anyways, it's just a small evidentiary hearing in front of the judge, so there was no discovery ahead of time or anything like that. Anyways, my client is on the stand. Come to find out they have video footage of her smearing dog tea on their house, printing out photos of their kids and writing racial slurs on them, family was Jewish, and covering her house with racist signs, like papering her entire house. Needless to say, my jaw dropped. Client then perjured herself on the stand. They play a video where it's obviously her, but she repeats that's not me over and over. Most painful court moment of my life. In-house attorney here, but I interned for a judge at our court of common pleas during law school. There was a case of a guy that asked two early 20 girls a ride from the mall to a gas station. He told them he would pay them cash for the trip. During that trip, he sat in the back seat and had advised that he had a pellet gun that closely resembled a handgun. He said he had only pulled it out to show the girls but never did anything further. That had been his testimony during all the proceedings. He willingly takes the stand and the prosecutor is questioning him about the gun and how he handled it. This dude willingly admits that he held it to the passenger's temple, threatening to shoot her with what she believed to be a real gun. He also corrected the prosecutor during questioning, telling him that he never stated it wasn't a real handgun. That jury verdict came about as fast as one could. Police officer. I know, MR. Defendant. I've arrested him on 3 prior occasions and he always gets away. After 7 attempts to prep this witness to find out what can kill the case and his career, he stonewalled me every time. I even said I'd prep him during his night shift. This case hinged upon the police officer's credibility. Now the police officer shocks the court and me with his bias against the defendant. Anyway, if I knew about this bias, I would have dismissed the case. Now, the police officer is on an official court ruling as a non-credible witness. His career is over. All because he decided he was too important to be prepped as a witness. If I didn't document every time I contacted him to schedule prepping, I would have had hell to pay at my office. Eyewitness had brain cancer and sometimes had trouble recalling details, dates, etc. ever since the tumor was removed. I found out the day before trial when I asked, somewhat as a joke, somewhat as due diligence, if they ever hallucinated or forgot their own name. Had a major civil rights case in federal court arising from a police shooting where the guy died. Turns out the police had an entire internal investigation file that they didn't let us know about. That was not fun to explain to the judge. There was a temporary order of protection in place, and we went to court on the lengthier order of protection. I talked strategy with my client the night before, but unbeknownst to me she reconciled with her abusive shitbag baby daddy. I had 3 OP hearings that morning, and did not get a chance to talk to her until 3 minutes beforehand. We had the wrong judge. I knew as soon as she told me she was going to be arrested for violating the temporary order. Sure enough, they both got a week of jail and I had to watch their 3-week-old child for a few minutes before a bailiff carted her off to God knows where. They both got fired for missing a week of work. They couldn't get the kid out of the system. Evicted. Homeless. The whole 9 yards. All she had to do was tell me they got back together. All she had to do. Criminal defense, Canada. Talked to a client in cells. Said that she was hanging out at her baby daddy's and then, as she was leaving, the cops came and harassed her. So she resisted. And that is why she is in jail. Turns out she was getting aggressive with him and he kept trying to get away from her. He ended up calling the police. While he was on the phone with the police, she starts beating him up. The police hear this and immediately respond. She was trying to flee the scene after beating her man up while he was on the phone with the cops because he was attempting to passively solve the issue. But she wouldn't leave. Luckily she has no record. But, man, I felt bamboozled. I learned a healthy dose of skepticism whenever people told me things from there on out. Yeah, gotta love it. Divorce client came into my lobby one morning. Panicked. She starts screaming about how the money was missing. What money? I asked her. Apparently her and her soon-to-be ex didn't believe in banks, as they kept a suitcase with close to $100k in a safe in their bedroom closet. One morning she saw the safe was open and the money was all gone. You'll have no idea how hard it is to trace and prove the existence of that much money in loose 100s, 50s, and 20s. Cost her several grand in fees alone for how much work went into finding it. When if she had just told us about it, we could have placed it into a trust account pending the divorce. My client had a no contact order with his ex-girlfriend. He got a call and hang up. Dialed 69. It was her. She called the police saying he had violated the no contact order. We show up to court and I think I have a pretty good argument on his side. 2 police officers walk up to me and look at my client's name on my case folder when he was in the restroom. When he comes back, they arrest him on an outstanding warrant for armed robbery. I get a continuance for his case. His car gets impounded in the garage. I can't get him transported from the jail to face his violation of a protection order because that is how the police worked in that city. The public defender takes over his cases. I moved away shortly after that. But that was a very bad day for my client. I stopped putting names on my case files after that so no prosecutor or police officer would be tempted to look through them. The lawsuit was the first time I heard about the case claim. I called up the manager and asked and he denied knowing anything. I held 3 separate interviews with him and his staff and all said nothing happened that day. We prepared a defense of bullshit. At the manager's deposition, after the standard state you name, etc., the first F-king question the plaintiff's attorney asked was, "Do you recognize my client?" Double quote. "Oh yeah. Now that I see her I remember." Double quote. Client asked a friendly company to forge documents to provide evidence of a fair rate for defect rectification works. A whistleblower told the Corruption Investigations Board. Destroyed their credibility for the whole claim even where there was good grounds and ended up in a whole criminal investigation. Great billings for us though. My father was handling a case of his friend's family. About a property that this friend and his brothers and sister inherited. Horrible mess as you can imagine. Deeply conflicted family. After few years on one of the court hearing one brother mentioned a name that never appeared during the entire lawsuit. Turns out there was one more brother that they all decided to not mention because he was a black sheep of the family. Years of tiring work went down the drain. From what I understand, my father, who was doing it all for free because he owed him, got into argument with his friend. They never spoke to each other again and guy found a new lawyer. Had a professional trumpet player as a client. He was fighting with his sister over his mother's conservatorship. Mom was old and exhibited signs of dementia. Sister accused him of all kinds of stuff. Being a criminal, a Hell's Angel, etc. He accused her of all kinds of stuff as well. I asked him about being a criminal and Hell's Angel. He said sarcastically, "Yeah, I'm a Hell's Angel," but did tell me about an arrest he had for a weapons charge. He was stopped for speeding. Was coming from his martial arts class. And had nunchucks on the seat. They're illegal. Okay. Later I found out that the weapons charge was not nunchucks but a sawed-off shotgun. The police stopped him because they suspected him of drug dealing and had been watching his house. And he really was a Hell's Angel. TLDR. Don't trust trumpet players. Failed to mention that he'd had a threesome with his ex-wife and her boyfriend 2 weeks before divorce proceedings. We didn't learn this until the ex was on the stand. Such a fun surprise. In law school I had an internship at a defense contractor. Most of my work related to disagreements with government auditors regarding whether expenses were appropriately being charged to government contracts. One of the issues was how much of the cost of the executive jet could be charged. After a lot of research, arguments, and negotiation, I was successful in getting the expenses allowed. After reporting my success, my supervisor congratulated me and proceeded to inform me that the executives would be pleased because a second executive jet had already been purchased and had yet to be disclosed to the auditor. I felt very used. The info was very intentionally kept from me until after the successful first round of negotiations with the auditor. I did not seek employment there after the end of my internship. I have a client who was charged with violating his probation a second time. He was a good talker and had a good story about how he is an addict. He sweet-talked the judge on the first violation and got a couple months of active jail time. Most importantly, he was continuing to say that he was just a user that slipped up and wanted to get help. At the hearing on the second violation, the prosecutor brought in 2 police officers as witnesses unexpectedly, and they testified that when responding to an overdose, the phone next to the dead body lit up. The phone lit up with a message from my client saying, "I am not going to deal to you anymore because you don't show or are late always." The police then go talk to my client, whom explains that he wasn't giving her heroin, only Molly. When he tries to explain the situation on the stand, the prosecutor asks him why the 2 times he was arrested on probation he only had heroin on him and not Molly. He was not charged in connection with the dead body, so there was no indication of that event before the trial. And the client neglected to inform me that he was involved and talk to the police about that event. At that point, the multi-year offer was gone and he will be doing more than a decade. Defending a tenant from eviction. The client kept saying she was being evicted because the police were called after her abusive ex showed up. That's actually discrimination, leaving the landlord liable if that was the reason. But landlord's attorney says they're evicting for cause, not the ex thing, and asks whether the tenant told us what she did. I go back and ask if there is anything she hasn't told us. Well, maybe it's the fire I started in the laundry room. I was really coked up and the security footage looks bad. This is about 5 minutes before the judge calls the case from the bench. Woof. I'm an immigration attorney who does deportation defense. For a couple years I did work with unaccompanied minors, mostly Central American refugee children fleeing their home country for a multitude of reasons without a parent. So there I was busting my ass off for an asylum case for this one kid. We show up to our court date with the guardian, older brother, to set the trial date with all my filings prepared. Just brother shows up without the kid and says, oh yeah, he wanted to go back to home country, so he did and just left. Double quote. Well, what would have been a helpful conversation to have with his F-king lawyer is the possibility or consequences of that. They never mentioned anything to me. By just up and leaving. He self-deported and cannot come back for 10 years. If he had talked to me, I could have cut him a deal for voluntary departure without that 10-year bar. Plus I did all that work. Man, I still get mad just telling this story now. My cousin was the moron client. He and his second wife are divorcing and she wants full custody of the kids. No visitation. Just lots of child support. He's willing to a 50-50 split at first and finds an attorney for the case. They're going over everything when he casually mentions how the mom drugs them literally every night so they sleep and she can go out to the bars while he works the night shift. Cousin thought this was his smoking gun to beat her in the custody battle. Attorney had to explain that. No, you can't tell this to the judge or that you've known she's been doing this for years. You'll both lose the kids and they'll go to state custody. Both of them are petty, incompetent, and as you can imagine we don't interact with that side of the family much. This has all been retold to me by other relatives. So don't worry. CPS was informed of all of this. I do not know the outcome yet. I'd have to ask. Paralegal for insurance defense. One of my first cases. I was completing discovery with a very young client, barely 18. She claimed the city bus rear-ended her when she was slowing to make a turn. Then he got out of the bus yelling at her and screaming expletives. We submitted these responses. We come to find out months later there is actually video on the city bus, of course, of her trying to make an illegal U-turn and ramming herself into the side of the bus. Then she got out of the car and started screaming at the bus driver, who stayed silent in his bus. The video also caught her on her phone. Not the smartest person I've met. Employment lawyer here. I mostly represent companies. This happens a lot. But to be honest, it usually isn't the client's fault when the client is a company. For example, we had a big sex discrimination claim we were defending. At one point we uncovered an email sent from one colleague to another that was smoking gun stuff. The problem is both those employees had left the company a few months ago. The first time we knew of their sexist banter was months down the line in the thick of discovery disclosure. We settled soon after. I was with witnesses and counsel ahead of an appeal hearing. Appellant was overseas. Whilst preparing the witnesses beforehand, 5 minutes before the hearing is due to start, it transpires that the witnesses lied in their witness statements about a fairly large credibility point. Counsel and I cannot mislead the court, and so we threatened to walk out unless they agree to amend their statements before the judge. They agree, but were clearly terrified they had fatally undermined the appeal, which they would have if the other side had actually showed up to court. Long story short, we amended the statements, and because the other side couldn't be bothered to send anyone to represent themselves and question the credibility of the witnesses, the judge wasn't particularly bothered by the change. We proceeded to win the appeal. Hooray, and they all had lemonade. The end. Had a client accused of DUI. According to her, she never drove the car, someone else did. I won the case for her in district courts. The prosecution could not prove she drove the car. During appeal, not my case anymore. Different lawyer, she took the stand again. On a side question regarding behavior of the car, she explained in full details how the steering wheel felt as she drove down a specific road. She then explained to the court how she was not driving when they were stopped by the police. There was a quick guilty verdict. Whole case built on something being installed causing a flare-up of client's allergies. Every step of the way. When it was brought up with the client, the mum, she would break out in tears and refuse to further discuss it further. We get to the hearing, and the whole thing goes pretty well overall. I think there is a chance at a win. It was a long shot case to start with. The judge asks the ultimate question none of us wanted to fight through the tears to ask. How old is your daughter? 35 and has not lived with a mom in 15 years. We still ended up with a mere verdict. But why did the daughter's allergies matter when she does not live with you? A lady applied to be a legal assistant at my firm. She casually mentioned that she knew me and some clients I had. My boss ran it by me, so and he said her name. I told him yes, I indeed knew who this lady was. My clients were the ones applying for custody of her kids to get them away from her. Her file with Child Family Services was as thick as a tome. Application declined. Case I was working on just the other month. Boundary dispute with the neighbor. Thought it was all fine and dandy until a disclosure from the other side of a video of my client pouring liquid human excrement on the garage door of his neighbor's property. Fair to say we got laughed out at trial. Edit. Not a lawyer, but had this happen to my but it was the other side of the table that had the experience. So got let go from a retail management job and was suing for wrongful dismissal. Part of the corporation lawyer's argument was that my was having staff leave from a back exit to help with conversion rates, band practice. So said to her lawyer during a break, why don't they just show us the security shots of the staff leaving via that exit? Lawyer went back in the room and laid into them and voila. Settlement number went way up. Defending a client against a complaint of racial discrimination from a contractor. Matter proceeds through all preliminaries. Disclosure and heads for trial. In passing 2 weeks before trial, client mentions that he and the contractor were sleeping together for several years and stopped around 2 months before the complaint. Had a client accused of hitting his female roommate on the back with an object, doesn't matter what it was. He confessed to the police that he had done it. Very remorseful and tearful. Non-English speaker. Told me be understood that he had committed assault and was ready to take his punishment. I asked him why he hit the roommate with the object. He said, because of my wife. I asked what he meant, and he explained that the roommate was on top of his pregnant wife attempting to choke her when my client hit the roommate. Nobody had bothered to ask anyone involved. The roommate simply told the police that my client hit them, and my client agreed that he'd hit them. Doing an eviction defense case. Landlord refused to accept rent, which is illegal in my state. Turns out landlord refused to accept rent cause tenant broke into adjoining unit and set fire to it cause she was fighting with her neighbor. Never mentioned it. And I filed exceptions for the refusal to accept, so I walked in. After calling the case, immediately launched into my argument how this was improper. Now, It still legally was incorrect, but an eviction for non-payment is way more advisable than an eviction for cause. I nearly just walked out of the courtroom. Would have been better for my client. I once had a client in a child custody mediation where I represented the woman and her ex-boyfriend was on the other side. We were trying to agree on custody and child support for their one child they had together. We get nowhere for about 4 hours until the mediator says he found something out from the other side and that my client needed to tell me something. Turns out she was currently pregnant. Not with her current boyfriend's child, but with her ex-boyfriend's child that we were currently mediating with. Hard to strike a negotiation when I don't know there's a second child to be. Told her if she ever lied to me again I'd fire her. Employment discrimination case. Our argument was that our client was treated differently based on her race, gender, and sexual orientation, the trifecta. It was quite the unfortunate surprise to find out during her deposition that she was married to a man. She had no reasonable explanation in deposition, and confessed to us after that it was a green card marriage. Since it's not a real part of her daily life, she didn't think to tell us about it. Didn't do her any favors on the sexual orientation argument, but still got her a massive settlement. Plaintiff on the other side blurted out how my client raped him as a child. Plaintiff alleged incident happened when he was 7 years old. At that time my client would have been 2 years old and living in another country. Case thrown out and my client got awarded costs. More of an issue of me being a child than accidentally withholding information. When I was younger, my mom and my dad were having a custody battle over me. Normal stuff. My mom was a heavy drug addict. She was good at hiding it though. At least to my 10-year-old self. She would routinely wake me up at about 10 or 11 PM to take me on a car trip. Because I loved being in the car and playing my Nintendo DS. We would drive to a specific place that was about an hour away. Then come back after meeting with her friend. We'll call him Tim. I hated Tim. He always scared me. Even though he tried to be friendly, he never actually did anything. Just a scary dude. I got bad vibes from him. As it turns out, he was her drug dealer. We went on these trips for about 2 years. So I would be about 12 when I finally told my dad that I hated Tim. I hated that he kept moving around in shady areas that made me feel scared. It didn't take me too long after that to realize he was her drug dealer. I thought it was just weed, but it was more. The fact that my mother took me on drug deals as a 10-12-year-old was the final nail in her coffin, and my dad finally got full custody of me later that year. Had to help a man obtain asylum in my country because he was being wrongfully threatened by other families back home. During asylum interview, I explained he had a blank criminal record and he was a model citizen. Apparently the interviewers found out the guy was a convicted murderer in 2 countries and a war criminal. Asylum was denied. Lawsuit filed against my client's contract dispute. We filed an answer and counterclaims including trespassing claims because plaintiff had left items on my client's property. Plaintiff attorney emailed me after we filed and said I was surprised to see the trespassing claims since my client had your client's permission to store the items on the property. Asked my client about this and they said well yeah, but they didn't have the permission anymore once they filed this suit. Double quote. My mom was being sued by a woman who cut her off on a 45-mile-per-hour main road to make a right-hand turn. Stopped suddenly. Mom hit her. You get it? She filed for like $50,000 in bodily damages. Citing she couldn't work. She's still receiving treatment. Chronic pain, etc. Went on her FB. She had FB live videos of her while driving. And she made a post on her birthday about how thankful she is to have her full health and specifically full use of her body to live a healthy, full life. Sent it to my mom's lawyer. Suit was dropped the next week. Some people are f***ing dumb. It fortunately wasn't my client. But at a child custody mediation once our point of emphasis was dad's drinking problems. Dad and his attorney make all kinds of noises about how he's sober, going to AA, providing a safe home, etc. I have never felt more like Matlock than when I ran his name in the court's website and found a DUI from the week before with his toddler child in the vehicle. His mom had picked the kid up and never told the child's mother. Screenshotted it. Emailed it to the mediator and attorney in the other room. And other attorney came in 5 minutes later white as a sheet. We settled within 30 minutes. Simple action for possession. Eviction. In court. Wrapping up presentation of the evidence. Very quick. Maybe 15 minutes. Sit down. Client says. Yeah, no, I think they moved out last week. Client charged with sex with minor. It was his word versus hers, so prosecutor did not have an airtight case. I was able to negotiate him a sweet deal keeping him out of prison. But at the urging of his wife, he declined and insisted he was innocent. When he was arrested, they did a search warrant on his computer and cameras. Initially nothing was found. As case progressed, they found a SD card that had not been sent to forensics. Lo and behold, it was full of incriminating photos of client and minor in very compromising positions. Sweet deal went off the table and he went to prison instead. My client revealed he had an inappropriate relationship with a crime victim complainant. But only during his deposition on an accusation that he used excessive force on the criminal defendant. Definitely would have wanted to know that info beforehand. In cases where parents are in danger of losing their children, they always say they can pass a drug test. Guess what? They can't. Once they fail a drug test, they can count on losing their kids. At least, temporarily. This will sound bad, but she should have told me she was pregnant. Client beat the crap out of her baby daddy's car at a stoplight with a tire iron. Was arrested. Video evidence was irrefutable. She went to jail, multiple priors, and was on probation. I went to see her in jail and put some money in her commissary since she needed a toothbrush. She mentioned offhand that baby daddy was in jail and good riddance since he got her pregnant again. Hol up. You're pregnant? How far along? Damn woman. I could have played up the compassionate side of the judge to avoid jail time. She told me it was all good. She could do a month easy then get released early and avoid probation. Which actually makes a lot of sense. Wished her good luck. Was in the middle of a mediation for a disability discrimination case. About 3 hours in. Talking to the mediator, clearly a problematic firing. They didn't even attempt to accommodate her in any way. Huh? Well, they did offer me that other job, but I didn't want it because it paid less me. Dot. Can we have a moment please? Double quote. If they try to give you a different role in the company, that can really undermine an employment case about being fired. Client. I was riding my bike. Fell at a large pothole and was seriously injured. Counsel. Yeah, that's a big hole. Okay, let's get a medical report and assess damages. Friend of client. I've got a video if you need it. Video. Shows client clearly very drunk. Walking along with his bike and falling off the curb vaguely in the vicinity of the pothole. Doctor. Yeah, there aren't really any injuries either. My dad is a delinquency attorney. So he represents kids who've been removed from their homes or parents who've had their kids removed by the state. One day at a delinquency hearing, he's got the mom as a client. And she's real upset. Like agitated at even having to be there. Finally, the judge says, "Mom, when was the last time you used meth?" Double quote. She replies, "In my car in the parking lot before I walked in here." Double quote. I guess that's either a should have told me sooner or a shouldn't have said anything at all. I had a client in a nasty business dispute who admitted to having an affair, which led to things getting weird at the business. She never told me she was having an affair with her ex-husband's son, her stepson, until her deposition. That was a fun fact that should have been disclosed earlier. Represented a father in a custody battle. They had several kids together and I got them removed through an emergency order. Several months later we go to trial and I begrudgingly have to call a kid to testify. The child is young, but mature for their age. And really the only person who can testify to what happens at mom's house. So, I put kid on the stand and we spend a good hour and a half talking about what kind of craziness happens at mom's. Late night parties. Excessive alcohol. Physical and verbal altercations. Etc. At the end of my questioning I messed up and asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to share with the court?" Apostrophe. Kid replies, "Yes. I want to live with my mom again." Apostrophe. Absolute gut punch.